Okay, welcome to class 5. And today we're going to talk about self-reflection, which is really vital in the work we do of supervision. And we'll talk about why. But before oh wait, Nada had a question last time, and if she shows up, I'll answer it when she gets here. So try and remember that. Okay, just gonna, okay. What we're going to talk today about is what is reflective practice in the context of supervision. How is it different from self-evaluation? We're going to look at the foundations of reflective practice. Here she is. Welcome, Nada. We're,
Thank you. Sorry I'm a little
that's
late.
okay. That's okay. We're just getting started. And before I forget, I had a little note to myself to answer a question you had asked last time about the wisest, most compassionate self and whether I could share that. So I was thinking about it, and I could if people wanted to. It's an attachment protocol. It's a way for people to build a strong, secure attachment with safe place or sacred place, whatever they want to call it, potential allies if they want spirit guides, spirit beings, or anything else they want as an ally, and or wisest, most compassionate self. So the therapists who work with me asked me to write a script for that. It's something I use to. It can be very powerful for those who are open to working in this way. Some people don't like it, but if they do like working this way, um, it can be very powerful for the nervous system to have that experience of safe and secure attachment. And for many of my clients, most of my clients have PTSD, which would have come from complex trauma. It is the first time in their lives they've ever felt that safe, secure attachment with another being, even if they consider it imaginary, um, even if it's, or even if they consider it spiritual, whatever it is, the nervous system is often overwhelmed. It can be a very moving experience. And so yeah, I can share that with you. I won't share the other part. I mean, because it takes a lot more than a handout to explain how I do trauma processing with the wisest, most compassionate self. But if you have a trauma processing framework, a lot of people use IFS, it can be used in with that. It's just another ally. EMDR also has allies, so it can be used in any of that. But sometimes I use it standalone when a person's really dysregulated or has never experienced safe connection to have that safe connection. So I will just, if it's okay, I'll just email it to everyone. If you want it, great. If you don't want it, just ignore it. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. It's I don't use a script when I do it because I've just sort of been doing it for a few years now. It's just sort of evolved. But because people ask for a script to start with, that's what I gave it to. So there's nothing strict about it. Use it however works for you and your clients. Okay?
Thank you so much for remembering. That sounds great. I may ask you additional questions by email once I get it.
Okay.
That sounds amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite powerful. Yeah. So yeah, and it's on my list. I'm going to do an audio of it and put it on my own website just that people can go in and use because some of my clients have a hard time going back to it on their own. Like we can do it really easily in session when I take them through it. Their whole nervous system goes back, but sometimes they struggle to get there on their own. So if I can put it online, just like it's not going to be really long, right? Probably 10, 15 minutes. They can go in and reconnect and calm their nervous system. And the more often they use it, the neural pathways become more secure. They can start to access it much more quickly when they're dysregulated, and that's what we want with with trauma. We not only want to do the symptom work where, I think Jen used the dandelion metaphor, but the flowers that are all up, all the dysregulation, physiological, cognitive, emotional symptoms, but we want to do the root work. What did that come from? So this allows us, for me, it will address the symptoms to bring regulation to the nervous system, but I also use it as a real powerful support when I'm doing trauma processing, because one of the things about trauma is we can feel like nobody gets it, nobody understands it. But if it's an ally, if it's your wisest, most compassionate self, or some people have a spirit animal, a wolf or a bear or whatever, or a guardian angel, whatever they have there, they get it 100%. And the client can feel that, and that really matters. And just to kind of throw it out, even though I'm not going to go down that road, what I also like about it is sometimes the clients don't have words and they don't know how to say what's going on somatically, or there's no story attached because they were dissociated or it was pre-verbal. Or I've had clients who said, this memory belongs to my ancestors. It doesn't belong to me, but it's in my body. And so when there's no words to a story, I just ask them to show their ally, or this most compassionate self, or whomever, what they're carrying. And when that's met with 100% compassion and understanding and support, that can also release it. So I really like that it doesn't need words. Okay. So that was my tangent for today. Hopefully, and we'll go back to reflective practice. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about reflection and why it's so important in supervision, how it's different from self-evaluation. We're going to talk about what are the foundations of the practice and why it matters so much. Some key domains of reflective practice in supervision are parallel process with the supervisee, countertransference, vicarious trauma. We're going to also talk about reflective tools you can choose to use with your clients, different prompts that can help the client reflect on what happened, sometimes after an incident, sometimes during. But we'll talk about three different models that are sort of the main models for reflective practice in supervision. And we're going to talk about how do you evaluate where your supervisee is at when it comes to developing reflective practice, and how do we shift our supervision in such a way as to support their development, and just talking about the ethical, organizational, relational dimensions of reflective practice and how those can support what we do with our supervisees. So, and if you have any questions as we go, just ask, okay? So we're going to talk, I think I covered all this. Yeah, these are the sort of headings for each area. So the foundations, it's how is reflective practice different? It's more subjective than objective, right? It's not evaluating myself on specific criteria. How did I did, rating myself? Is it a pass fail? It's nothing like that, where we're trying to look at a specific outcome. It's more about understanding subjectively and understanding ourselves at a greater depth. Why did I do what I do? Or why did I do what I did? And be able to understand it and explain it. Because that has been one of the most challenging things for me as a supervisor and like a professor when I was teaching, was I need to be able to explain exactly why I did what I did or why I'm saying this. Because just because my gut says or my intuition says, that's not enough. Or I've got, I've done all these trainings and it kind of coalesces in my brain and I can't really speak it. That's not good enough. I need to be able to speak it to help people understand, to help me understand why I do the things I do. Some of it's hidden, and so we bring it to our awareness in the moment, and that allows for depth of understanding and genuineness in the work we do when we're able to be honest with ourselves and just look on with curiosity rather than judgment. Why am I doing this? What's my reaction? I wonder what that's about. And that helps us to deepen our growth as professionals and as supervisors. So it has to do with looking at our actions, our emotions, our behaviors, assumptions, and values to understand and improve our practice and increase learning. So it's intentional. There's an intention to do this. We make time to do reflection. Um, it's it's structured in the models we're going to use. I think that has to, at some level, we start out that way. After a while, it probably becomes intuitive and we do more self-reflection. My self-reflection practice really, I think, was grounded in walking my dog for 15 years. Before she passed, she insisted she take me on 2 walks a day. And I had lots of time to think, right? And I would think about how do I explain this to my clients? It's really confusing. It's confusing to me. So how do I explain it? Or how do I, like, those are the things that go through my brain as I was walking. What metaphor can I use to explain trauma? How can I understand what happened to me in that session better? So having a time for it, that became my time. And I think we can find our time somewhere, but it's really important. In supervision, it's relational. We're learning from each other as we do this reflection. Um, as my intern or my supervisee is talking about the reaction to things or what they've been thinking about, it spurs me to think and reflect too. It goes back and forth, and we have a relational context that we're both developing depth and understanding, and we learn from each other, and that's very cool. And it doesn't end. It's always, a cycle. Experience analysis, changed action, look at it again. We keep learning. It's just a way of being in our practice that go, how did I do it? I do it after every class. I would always say I never teach the same class twice because I always think, oh, I should have done it this way or I could have done it that way or what if. But we do that. I do that in sessions. I mean, I think we do that when we reflect on our sessions, on our supervisory sessions. It's constant learning. And it's transformative. It really does change how we see ourselves, how we relate with our clients, and how we relate to our supervisees. Because when I speak to my clients or to my supervisees from the truth of things I've realized at a level of depth, there's a genuine connection there. Um, for example, I've been reflecting a lot, and sometimes it's my own personal work on endurance. And endurance is a survival strategy that many of us have developed, especially if you're super competent, the super competent one in your family, um, trying to hold things together. We learn how to endure lots of stuff and put our needs aside. And it can become a way of life and part of an identity. And sometimes we still step into it when we don't need to. And that's what we want to do with trauma is bring to awareness what are survival strategies? Do I need it in this time and place? And can I do it differently to be kinder to myself? Because sometimes we have times in life when we have to endure. There's no other way. We're in survival mode. But it's not great if it becomes a way of life, no matter what. So that's just an example of, part of what I've been reflecting on a lot lately. And it my clients get it. All my clients endure, quite frankly. So talking about it, they get it. But that comes from reflecting and talking about it with my supervisees, and they're adding things to it. Yeah, endurance is a survival strategy, but gosh, it costs us so much. So those kinds of things, it's very transformative. Why it matters, it brings really important information to the surface. What are my patterns? What are my triggers? What's my intuition telling me? And I wonder what that's about. Blind spots. Um, it turns our awareness into insight so that our actions become intentional and not automatic. They're not just a response. They can become a grounded, intentional choice. So I'll give an example if that's okay. When we moved to this house, I was unpacking for days and the TV was on, and it was about way back when, it was 12 years ago, I guess, about terror attacks in Paris. Okay. And that was on the news constantly. And I'm walking down, I honestly took my dog for a walk and I'm walking down the street and there was a group of young men talking, laughing, and I felt anxious. And I'm like, what is going on with me? Why am I so anxious? And so I had to sit with that. And what I realized, had to sit with that in curiosity, let go of shame because it was, it was really unconscious, but just these men were Arabic. And that's what I've been seeing on TV all the time. And somehow fear crept in. And I thought, well, that's a problem. Because I'm not going to choose that. Because I don't want that. It's not fair. It's not right. I can see where this came from, but I choose not to see it that way. Um, I had clients from all over the world, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, how could that have impacted my relationship with them if I didn't bring that to the surface, if I wasn't aware? So that's an example of how self-reflection can bring stuff up and allow us to go, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. That doesn't belong to me. And I'm going to choose to do it this way. So that was truly unconscious, a blind spot at that point in time. Or intuition. It's not okay for me to say to, I mean, it is somewhat say, well, I did this because I had a feeling. Okay, what was the feeling based on? To supervise, they want to know, what am I looking for when I want to choose this action? And so had to learn to explain, things like, what are my flags for complex trauma? The truth is, whenever I hear someone talking about a sense of self that is flawed, not good enough, um, defective in some way, I'm going, okay, I need to check for trauma because a child is not born into this world thinking there's something wrong with them. That's something happened to wound the sense of self. And I want to understand what it is. Does this person they might have PTSD, they might not. It might have been a single incident and it didn't cause PTSD. But honestly, more often than not, when I do a PTSD screening, it comes up as trauma and complex trauma as the description, when I'm looking at what are the symptoms. So all my supervisees know if they're talking about that, you might want to do a trauma screening. We want to understand what's going on. Yeah, it tells us our strengths, growth areas, uh, improves our ability to regulate our own emotions, our learning, our decision making, and our ability to stay present. Because if I know that things are going to trigger me, I can put protections in place. Um, for example, I can do breath work before I come in to see a client. If I find it really difficult, I can put if I'm online and have headphones, I can put EMDR music in the background. Not that it just helps me to process. I don't even hear it when I'm doing it, but there are things we can do to help ourselves and support ourselves. So, core framework, trauma-informed supervision, and why reflection matters. It's our relationship with the supervisee mirrors the relationship of the supervisee has with the client in some ways. And so how the supervisee treats clients might reflect how we treat our supervisee. So everything, I'm going to tell you everything I'm reflecting on and trying to make sure everything is transparent because I want the same thing for clients. We're not doing anything to anybody. And honestly, when you work from a somatic, trauma-informed, polyvagal kind of perspective, you you're doing some of the same types of prompts as a supervisor and a client, but you're not going to the depth as you would with a client. But I'm checking in. If my supervisee is dysregulated, Can you tell me what's happening? What's going on in your body right now? Because I can see you, or I can see your jaw clenching when you talk about this, or I can see that you stop breathing, or I can hear in your voice what's going on. What are the thoughts, the emotions that come up, right? So we do that in supervision sometimes, depending on what's being called, what's coming up. And they can learn how to do that with the client. And they also learn what it feels like to do that and how impactful that is. Um, Core competency, again, it's really important we be curious, non-judgmental, um, and aware of our own triggers, because there's a lot of shame sometimes attached to our reaction and our thoughts that come out of wherever. But if we were to go back and sort of pull the threads, where does this come from? It makes sense in a context. It might not make sense in our context now. But if we understand it in the context, we can start to unravel it and sort through it, and make conscious decisions. So it's not driving the bus, we are. And again, it's attending to the whole supervisee, their trauma history. I get that. It's are they being triggered? I'm not getting to know their whole trauma history. But if they come in and they say, this, I was meeting with this client and she was talking about her mom, and oh my gosh, that triggered me. And I say, okay, well, that happened. So how do we protect you? How did it impact your relationship? We're trying to help them understand and work through how do we set that aside in the moment so you can stay present and bring this part up with your therapist. Okay. Let's see. So the parallel process, again, it's the client therapist relationship. We talked about this last time. Sometimes the therapist will bring it to the supervisor and reenact some of the client stuff, the helplessness, the despair, the, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I feel like it's up to me to fix it because the client was like, here, fix this. And so we can start with them to reflect, wow, it sounds like you've picked this up from the client. Um, that sense of responsibility, can we untangle it? Those are just opportunities to do that. Vicarious trauma is also something we can deal with in supervision because it happens. I think you're going to do more on this if you haven't already with Jen. She's going to talk more about vicarious trauma with supervisees, but some of the symptoms, they're the same symptoms as PTSD, because PTSD now has a definition, and the DSM-5, it does talk about how you can develop PTSD if you get very specific, detailed information from somebody who's experienced a trauma. And you hear it again and again, or it's sometimes just one time's enough. So the intrusive imagery or nightmares, flashbacks. I've had clients flashbacks before. It's brutal because I think I'm very visual, and I don't know if you guys have had that experience too. But when clients have told me about things that happen, I'm like, oh man, it's in my head, and I can see it at different points. Or someone told me a place, an intersection where something really horrible happened, and now every time I drive by it, I get a flash in my head of what that was. So it's important to talk through that. Yes, that's vicarious trauma. Yes, that happens to us sometimes, and this is how we deal with it. So I talked with them about strategies of shutting it down. For flashbacks, the same strategies for myself, for supervisees, for clients. If it's a visual, put it up on a screen in your brain, take a remote and shut it off, or change the channel, and keep doing that until the brain stops popping it up. And I usually have a mantra that goes with it. Make up whatever it is. It's like, I release this. This doesn't belong to me, or it's over, something like that. I let this go, whatever works for the person, and that can help. The hopelessness, the loss of meaning, that can come up if we've been traumatized by our work with clients. Just feel like, oh my God, everyone is suffering. This is a brutal world. There's no hope. That sense of despair, and that we can't make a difference because the trauma is so big. Sometimes there's the enmeshment with the trauma survivors. Oh, I feel their pain so much. You can really empathize. And maybe because our stories overlap with some of our clients, it can bring stuff up. We can start to feel like the world isn't safe. There's nobody to be trusted from all I hear of my clients. It sounds like the world is full of terrible people, right? Because that becomes our lens if we're traumatized. The numbing or detachment and supervision, and people who might avoid talking about trauma because it's just too overwhelming. So we want to have discussion, room for discussion to talk about it, to, acknowledge, yes, it happens when you're working with trauma clients. This kind of stuff, we go through that and it's hard. This is hard work. This is part of our work. And you need support in this. You need a place to debrief. You'll need your own therapy with this to work through it because it's not something we can do alone. It's very hard. Uh, self self care is really important. Looking at the somatic cues, what's going on, are you sleeping? Are you eating? How is this impacting you? Have you withdrawn? Because these are things they could take to work with the therapist with, but we still want our space to be safe. Because it can shut us down for a time. There are really hard things people are dealing with, especially if we're dealing with we have our own vulnerabilities, dealing with family members who are ill or going through similar things. Um, Sometimes the universe seems to conspire to put everything in our face at once. My father had cancer twice, was told two different types of cancer, both times told the yes, less than a year to live, out like way outlived that. But as I was dealing with this, it seems like in a day I got like three people who are dealing with a parent with cancer. Like, like and that never happened. So sometimes we have those moments and it's in our face and we really need to be able to debrief and talk it through with someone because it can be traumatic and we might need to refer. We can tell our clients if this is really triggering for you, not our clients, our supervisees, if this is really triggering for you and it's too much, you can refer due to confidential conflict of interest. This is just too much for you right now. We need to keep you well. And we can also pre-screen cases if they're in our agency or practice, though we won't always catch everything. Um, so I believe Jen talked about the window of tolerance already, did she? Yes, okay. So we also are trying to keep the supervisee in that window of tolerance. Okay. Um, because if just like the client, just like any of us, if we get hyperarousal, emotional flooding, we cannot be present, we cannot cognitively process what's going on. Likewise, if we go into numbness and shutdown, dissociation, what's happening in the session will not be processed. So we're trying to bring the person into that window. I brought this over here because I do show my clients and supervisees, I do like this little terrarium with the plant inside. What we're trying to do for ourselves, with our supervisees, and with our clients is create a terrarium around the nervous system. So that inside we're safe, we've got the conditions we need to be regulated, we can still see all the stuff that's going on outside us. We're still hearing it. We can have some, we understand, but we want to stay. We want to create safety. And window of tolerance, being within it creates that safety because above or below are unbearably painful and we're in survival mode. Right. So that's what we're trying to help our supervisees to do. And sometimes, you'll hear when they start, the voice goes up and they're kind of freaking out about something or lots of tears. And it's like, okay, I'm going to ask you to slow down for a minute. Can you take a breath? Feel your feet on the floor. We're doing that too, right? What's going on in the body? What thoughts are coming up? Let's unpack that to try and figure out how it relates to your work with this client, how it's impacting your work with this client. How do we protect you? How do we support you in this? Any questions on any of this so far? No. Okay. Okay. So our practice and supervision, we talked about it being intentional, honest, open, and it's part of our commitment to growth. Curiosity has to be there, um, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions without defensiveness. It can be hard to do that. It can be hard to do that, right? But it's important to be consistent and holistic because honestly, the brain is so smart, is like a survival ninja in terms of strategies to get us through things, but it can deflect, minimize, distract, avoid. The body won't. The body always tells us the truth. Um, and I find that with my clients and supervisees, many of whom are very intellectual, we go in here and start. And so I'm asking them to move your awareness out of the brain, get out of there because it's taking over. Notice where in your body something's going on. Move your awareness there and see what comes up. And that's where truth comes, right? Because it's not being defended against as much. I have had people who've had walls come up physically, they feel that, and that's a protector part, and we deal with that. But that's truth too. That's fear. That's, I'm not going to survive this. But the body does tell the truth at a different level than the brain does, because the brain is afraid often. So modeling vulnerability, we just, that I think that's really important. Safety, allow admitting mistakes, allow for those responses. I read something on LinkedIn and I was pretty upset. I didn't respond. But it was somebody talking about a supervision group and a supervisee started crying and about something and the supervisor scolded them and told them they needed to apologize to the group for like allowing personal stuff to come up. And I was like, what? Well, you just shut down a whole group, right? I was like, gosh, I feel so badly for them. Um, because not all my supervisees have cried, but some have. Because the work we do is hard, and that's okay. I'm not doing therapy, but I can be with, or they say, oh, I think I made a mistake. I should have, okay, let's talk about this. I've probably made the same mistake, exact same mistake. Let's talk about it. What do we learn from this? Where do we go from here? I tell them when we start, whatever you're going to bring up, I'm sure I've done, to some extent, in some way. If it's a mistake, if you think, oh, I should have done this, whatever, other than relationship with clients. But you know what I mean? I've made mistakes and I've learned from them and I've made them again. I'm gone, oh my gosh, I should have done this differently. We have to allow for that. And sometimes I still bring them up after like current mistakes. I'll still bring up in session with supervisees. I'll say, I want to share this with you because this is what happened in my session and this is what I learned through reflection. And I think that helps. Validating and normalizing. This is a normal reaction you're having, and I can see why you thought that might be helpful. And it's just life. Sometimes we make mistakes. I was telling, it was kind of funny after the fact, but I was working with a client who was in a relationship with really, really abusive, an adult client, abusive parent, and really taking responsibility for wanting them to heal, to get them to heal, to say the right words that they're going to heal, right? That they're going to just be astounded that she's brought this into their life and want this so badly. And it's never happened so far in her relationship. And she just gets more negative stuff coming. And there was part of my brain that's going, oh, you need to just tell her, that generally people don't take that in if they've not acknowledged that something's wrong and they want to change, they're probably not going to hear it. And it's not that you're not saying it the right way, it's that they're hearing it and they probably don't agree. that's not something you want. And then the other part of my brain was saying, if you say that, she's not going to hear it because she's really invested in changing them. And and so I had this little battle in my head, and I finally said, "Oh, I'm going to say it anyhow." And I did, and she became defensive. No, I think this is my thing. I need to just go forward and try. I need to know I've tried. And I knew before I said something that I shouldn't say something because that was going to be the reaction. But I did anyhow. I tried. So we all have those moments, right? Like I knew better. Um, but I don't know. There was a part of me that's going, you got to try, just like she had to try. Maybe I was picking up on her stuff, but it was not helpful. So I had to back off. You're right. You have to get to your threshold of saying, I've tried everything and it's not working and I'm done. We all have different thresholds for that. And she's finally there 6 months later, but I couldn't make her get there any sooner. So in our alliance, we've talked about a lot of this. There are ways people do um, reflective practice. I have some supervisees who come in with like a journal. They write stuff in after sessions and reflect on it, and they want to talk about it. Some just reflect in case presentation. Um, I haven't actually done these. I'm going to show you the formal models for reflection. I haven't done those, but it does sound like those when we do it. I haven't sat there with the model, but you guys have probably, when you see the models, you go, oh yeah, they're intuitive. So we've probably done them, but it might help with somebody new to go through a model. Um, some people do direct observation or can role play with the client or a supervisee to talk about how do you, what's going on? What happened here? If you were the client, what did this feel like? What do you think this might have felt like? Those sorts of things. I usually check in. I usually do check in at the start of each session. Um, how are you doing today? They'll tell me how they're feeling physically, emotionally, or if they're really upset about a case. Okay, that's on our agenda. We're going to talk about that. Um, so those pausing moments, if I see they're getting distressed, they're talking about a case, or it was a really tough, sit session, I'll go, okay, we'll go through it. We'll talk about what happened. We'll talk about, what their thoughts were. We'll talk about what could they have done differently, and then I'll go, and how are you? How was that for you? That session. It sounds hard. And we'll reflect and we'll sort of unpack that. Um, yeah, to bring the uncertainty. It's okay to bring the uncertainty. I'm not going to report you to CRPO because you didn't know exactly what to do in every situation. That's not going to happen. Um, and just asking for feedback. Is this helpful? Is what I'm doing helpful to you? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? We talked about the power dynamics. We can reflect on that because there's the power of the supervisor just as a gatekeeper to the profession, as the evaluator of the supervisee's work. Which we talked about which knowledge counts. Should my knowledge take precedence over theirs? No. How do we work with it together? Um, being aware, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, of the intersection, race, gender, class, age. What does that create in terms of our supervisory dyad, in terms of the supervisor who's the therapist and their client? What's going on there? Because I've had those things come up, right? Um, and reflecting on it's really interesting to say to see how different people react to the supervisee, um, to myself. So, an example, one of the things I noticed of the power of identity is I've had clients from all different races, gender identities, that sort of thing. Um, And when they would come into my office, I had pictures of my kids on my desk because they're my happy place and they ground me. And my kids are now 26 and 24, but when they were little, really cute little pictures of them. And my children are biracial. So my husband's Black. My children appear Black, biracial. And it was interesting because I could see the eyes of the Black students go to those pictures and something shifted. So it was like, oh, I don't have to explain it all to her, kind of, you know? And I would ask, how are you doing in this city? Not very multicultural. How are you feeling? They're like, yeah, there are hardly any Black people. I know it's hard, isn't it? Have you been experiencing racism? I'm asking, right? And they're more willing to tell me. Um, and then alternatively, I had people come in, a couple of clients who are white supremacists. And then my reaction was fear. So there's an intersectionality that occurs um, in how we're perceived and how we perceive others. And it's important that we take the time to reflect on that because it does impact their relationship. Me as a female, there are a lot of assumptions made about me in terms of my background, because of how I present, because I'm white. It's interesting. And so to reflect on that and think about how is that impacting this relationship? How is my response impacting this relationship? Those are important questions. And same with supervisees. So, how do we do an antidepressive supervision practice? We need to talk to peers with different identities to understand, to get honest feedback about what we might be doing that's oppressive, what we're not understanding. One of my colleagues who I love dearly, he's an Indigenous counselor. And sometimes I work with Indigenous students, and he would give me insights and help me understand the supports and resources available. So that was helpful. Also, when I taught, it feels funny to say taught, it felt like facilitated because I'm certainly not an expert on cultures, different cultural identities, and um, knowing everything about cultures, but I brought in a lot of guest speakers who really knew what they were talking about on different aspects of culture. And it's helpful to hear lived experiences from people who are different than had different lived experiences for me to understand better. One of the things I used to get my students to do in the counseling psych program, one of their assignments, there were two different assignments. They would do reflective papers on one going to an Indigenous ceremony or presentation, and two to go to visit a faith community that they had no understanding of. And it was fascinating what they came back with. And it can help us understand differences better. Um, so I'll bring up more of that later, but when marginalization is occurring, when bias is occurring in ourselves or in our supervisees, we can gently bring it up. We can challenge it with curiosity. And we can try to understand where it comes from and try and be more present to the client. Who is this person? Yes, there is intersectionality of cultures, but they're still unique in who they are. So to understand all that. Um, Trying to think what else. Yeah, we want people who can challenge us. Um, and how are systems shaping presenting problems that that individuals are responding normally to? It's not a pathology. They're angry, they're frustrated, they feel like it's unfair, they're feeling hopeless. Well, that might be an absolute valid, normal response, whether it's the supervisee or the client. in a system that's very oppressive. So to help name that too is really important. Um, so just trying to challenge some of those interpretations that can further marginalize people. Countertransference is also an opportunity for reflection. So sometimes, a therapist responds to a client in the same way as everyone else in their life is responding. Um, that's reinforcing the client's understanding of relationships. So I know early in my practice, this was a challenge when I'd have, someone in a domestic abuse situation who was telling me all the great things about their partner and they didn't mean it. And somehow it was the client's fault that they got beat up. And all their family was saying, leave him, this is wrong. And I had, and there's part of me that I like, wants to say like, run, this is really bad, but you can't because then I'm part of the clients. I'm just, they're not going to, haven't heard anyone else who matters. They're not going to hear me. So when we do that, we need to challenge it. And sometimes our supervisees will say, but I said, it's only going to get worse. How's he treating you? He said he's abusive. And so it sets up dynamics in the relationship that really, the way I visualize it, I say to my supervisees, the client and you are facing each other and with the issue in the middle. But if we start criticizing the issue in the middle that they're defensive about, they stand in front of it. They're facing us with their arms out and going, you're not touching this. I'm defending it. We can't get anywhere because the issue's been put behind them because they're defending. So so we can talk about that, help them understand and say, well, what could you have done differently in this case? And so in that case, what I've learned to do instead is say, tell me what you love about this person. Tell me what your hopes are. I want to understand all of it. And what are your disappointments? But if I can hear their hopes, because people don't stay in relationships usually that are 100% bad. There's something, right, keeping them there. I want to understand that. What do you love about this person? How do you feel when you're with them? Tell me about that. Because then they're open to thinking we're willing to see it all. Because sometimes in therapy, we also mirror what's going on in the client's life by seeing someone as all bad or all good. And I try to get with supervisees and because, as therapists, we can see the person as all bad too, because we haven't had any interaction with them that tells us they're good and we're kind of upset how they're treating our client. But there's both. And so I've tried to talk to clients and they seem to hear it to say, you know what, it sounds like you really love this person and you want something better for them and you're really hurt that they continue to hurt you. When people can start seeing both realities, we have a chance to progress and move forward. They need to be able to hear all their parts, but we also need to do that. So when it comes up in supervision, I'm trying to not only hear what the client's doing, um, what's happening with me, what's happening with the client, but also helping them figure out how to do it differently to help the client move forward. Sometimes the therapist can feel what the client feels. Um, and that can be healthy because we can feel their sadness, we can feel their anger sometimes before they can, right? Sorry, go ahead, Nada.
I had a question along the lines of repair, what repair looks like when perhaps a therapist feels so deeply with the client
Mm-hmm.
that they end up enmeshing or over identifying a little bit, and maybe even saying something that they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't have said. And even if it lands well,
Mm-hmm.
if they reflect on it later, and let's say I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with a supervisee and the reflection comes up and they realize what happened, and
Mm-hmm.
now they're thinking, oh, I wonder if my client kind of picked up on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to kind of do some repair next session. What could that look like? And I can give a personal example if it
Please,
helps, but
please, because
well,
it does, because then I can
yes,
like, and we all have them, but yeah,
yeah. It's
but yeah.
as I'm giving this example, I'm feeling like oh, quite ashamed because of course
Oh,
there's that part of you
I
that says
know.
you
I
shouldn't
know.
have done that,
No,
right? But
yeah,
it
yeah.
happened this week, and this
Hmm.
is someone I've been working with for a long time. So I think it also, when you have a long relationship, you definitely feel like you know the person and you start to also know all the major players in their life.
Yes.
And sometimes it could feel like you know those people too. So in a way you
Hmm.
develop these kind of pseudo relationships with them.
Yes.
And unfortunately, this client discovered that her partner had betrayed her.
Hmm.
And I think she was blindsided
Mm.
and I was blindsided
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
And so we were sort of both feeling that emotion at the same time. I was feeling the blindsidedness with her.
Hmm.
And on the back end, it definitely activated some things for me, the betrayal itself.
Hmm.
And I think I kind of went ahead and I put a label and
Hmm.
it landed well with her because it sort of sounded like I'm on your side. But
Hmm.
obviously that was countertransference. So I think I said something along the lines of that, what he did was sort of like cowardly,
Hmm.
right? So obviously that's my own stuff, but it did
Hmm.
leave my mouth. So pretty
Hmm.
much once the session ended, I realized. And now
does it resonate for her? Because some
it did
actions are
resonate for her.
cowardly. I don't, I guess I would feel really understood if I were that client.
It resonated for her, but then it's like maybe I was overthinking. Should I have let her say that rather than me labeling it before?
Hmm.
Because she had not used that word
Hmm.
yet, right? So
Yeah.
let's say I'm working with someone who gave me this and said, like,
Hmm.
I noticed this and I want to bring attention to it next time.
Hmm. You could.
How would I tell them to do that? I guess,
So I would go back in
right?
and say, you know what, I've been thinking about what our discussion last time, and I think it was some of my own stuff coming up because I felt blindsided and upset on your behalf too. And I used the word cowardly, and I don't know if that felt like I was overstepping. If it was, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I like how
That's
direct that is because I'm like, okay, that's okay, right? Like you can be that
yeah,
forthcoming, you can be that transparent. It's okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Trauma informed means no running around. Like you just be
Yeah.
straight up because if people are guessing, it's scary. And there's so much gaslighting and manipulation and whatever in trauma. Often, if it's interpersonal trauma, we just want to be clear. Like, I think I shouldn't, like, I'm trying to think, oh, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm like sort of, yeah, something I said once that just gives me the still. I shouldn't have said that, right? And I went back to this client whose mother was an alcoholic. And there's so much neglect and abuse, and it was just all through her family. And then she had a boyfriend, and he was an alcoholic. And I was like, I don't know what I said. I said, oh, I'm just worried about you. And it was me. Like she was
Hmm.
like, I know what he is. I know. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about you being in a relationship with somebody who's an alcoholic again. You've been through so much and you know how hard that is. And that was all my stuff, right? And I went back the next week and I was like, oh, this has been bothering me. I need to apologize. That was my stuff. I shouldn't have said it. I'm sorry. Like, it won't happen again kind of thing. But I still feel that cringy thing. I was just like, that was my inside voice that came out because I had worked with her for so long. And gosh, she keeps getting taken advantage of. And just the people she's with who've been actively involved in addiction, the behaviors towards her have been horrible. And it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't have said that. So I just go flat out and just say it. Um,
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
does
helpful. That's
that?
really great. Yeah, I really appreciate that. But I was
Yeah.
also thinking like how would I advise the person to do it, right?
Yeah,
Like if
I
they
just say
told me
go
that
in.
that's how. Just do
Tell
it.
them you've been thinking about
Yeah.
this and it bothers you, and you really am worried you overstepped or you said something that was offensive to them, and you want to make it right. You want to
Yeah.
apologize and make it right. Sometimes my clients are like, "Oh no, I didn't even think about it." Like whenever I go back, right?
Right.
Like, no, it's fine. I thought, wow, she got it or whatever. But sometimes it's more us, but it's worth if it's bothering you, I think it's worth going back and saying something.
It's true. Without like, I don't want to take up so much space, but I think what made me kind of really want to do it is at the end she said something that was a compliment, but I understood from it that maybe I did too much. So she said that she's been finding the therapy very beneficial. She feels very safe. And she said, I tell everybody my therapist is my best friend. And then I thought, oh,
Ah,
am I? Because it's at first I was happy to hear that. I said, I'm
yeah,
so
I
glad
think,
that you're feeling
yeah,
safe in our work
yeah,
together.
yes.
And I'm like,
She
is she
knows what the
also
boundaries
referring?
are, right? She's not calling you
Mhm.
outside. She's not meeting you for coffee. You're not going to dinner
Yeah.
together. So it sounds like she meant emotionally she can trust you.
Okay. So I
How old is
also
she?
could be overthinking it.
How old is
She's
she?
basically my age,
Okay. So she sees
right?
you as a peer,
She sees me
and
as a,
she
yeah.
probably wishes, that she could be your friend. She knows she can't. I mean, I've had clients after, I had a client afterwards when we were done. She's like, if you weren't my therapist, would you be my friend? Because I really, it's like, if I weren't your therapist, I would be honored to be your friend. But, you know, and it's just,
Okay.
but I think I get that, but if there had been boundary issues, I'd worry about it.
Okay. Well, that's good because in this conversation, I'm realizing like working in more structured environments
Yeah.
has sort of made me feel like every time someone says something like this, I get scared because I think, oh my God, I did something wrong. There's a boundary issue. Maybe
She,
I was too
no,
friendly,
she
maybe
probably
this,
means
right?
about she can trust you better, more than
Yeah.
anyone in her life.
Okay. Which is
You know?
good to hear in a sense because the rapport has been, built.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
I
Shirley.
hope that helps. Any other thoughts on that from anyone else? I don't know. Okay. No, those are important questions because this is what we deal with, right? So we're going to do a kind of like what we've been doing. We're going to do a reflective check-in. So whether you do it on your laptop, whether you do it in writing with symbols or pictures or thoughts or words or whatever. The last part, the share, it's only if you want to. There's no having to share with a partner, okay? But I'm going to just ask you to think about a client interaction that left you feeling unsettled, confused, or moved in some way you didn't expect. So just take a moment to think about it. You might want to write down thoughts about what that incident involved, or just remember what happened. And then I'm going to ask you, so if you don't mind, I'm going to just guide this a little bit. Take a moment, either close your eyes or just allow them to stay open but unfocused in front of you. So choose a spot to focus on where you can just let your eyes go. Feel the chair beneath you, the ground, the earth supporting you. Use whatever kind of breath works for you to help you to feel grounded. Some people like to just breathe through their pores. Breathe out whatever you need to let go of in this moment that's distracting. And just think about that client interaction and do a body scan from head to toe. Notice anything that comes up, any places of tension, tightness, pain. And then I'm going to ask you to move your awareness from your brain into whatever part of the body is holding the memory associated with being unsettled, confused, or unexpectedly moved with respect to that interaction with your client. Move your brain into that. If it's your shoulder, move your brain into there, your awareness into the shoulder, and just say, thank you for showing up. I'm just here to understand with curiosity, no judgment. Breathe into whatever the sensation is. And just notice any thoughts, memories, feelings, or other physical sensations that come up. Notice anything that comes up. And you might need to ask if this physical sensation is yours or is it something you picked up from the client. If it's something that came from the client, there might not be a lot of context attached, but if it's yours, there'll probably be a little more. And whatever that sensation is, just say, I see you. Thank you for showing up. And you can stay with that for a few minutes to see whatever shows up. But when you're ready, you can just write down what came up for you, what your body told you. If your brain starts getting in the way of what your body told you and starts censoring, use your non-dominant hand to write because it'll take more attention for you to form your words and the brain won't be able to censor as much. So this is our countertransference to what the client said. Does anyone feel like speaking to any of this? And if you don't, it's fine. I mean, this is can be quite personal. Vanessa?
I can share
Sure.
because it's personal, but it's not too personal that it feels.
Sure.
So I saw a new client today,
Mm-hmm.
and they're seeing me for anxiety and panic. And in this intake, they shared with me that they were prescribed anxiety medication
Mm-hmm.
and that they were just supposed to take it for their like interview fear, and they've been taking it every day.
Mm-hmm.
So the feeling was like this like unsettling feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sort of, thinking ahead of what could happen if this client develops like an ongoing dependency.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the client also doesn't have benefits. So I feel a pressure to help this client rather quickly, like kind of this like
Mm-hmm.
pressure. Um, and then the part that's like my stuff, let's say, is that I worry that I might get in trouble, which is not the client stuff at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I'm responsible for all the possible bad things that could happen to him by some of the decisions that he's making.
Mm-hmm.
And then just based on what we had talked about, I feel like it's concordant countertransference because as much as I'm like worrying and anxious and it feels like my stuff, I'm also wondering like how worried and anxious the client might be as well, wanting to
Mhm.
resolve this issue.
Mhm. Yeah, you could be picking up the client's anxiety. Where did you, can I ask where you felt it in the body?
For me, with stomach,
Stomach.
like, when your stomach drops and you just feel like something bad's
Yeah.
gonna happen.
Yeah. 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 Fear. Yeah.
Here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes, yeah, it can be both. It can be the client's worry and it can be our fears of, I got to get this right. This is really important. And there's only so much time in that pressure.
Mhm.
And I know the client's doing this and how can I stop them as though somehow we could, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's helpful reflection, right? That, and when we debrief that with our colleagues, as we're doing here, hopefully you'll feel validation. Yeah, we can get that. I'd feel that way too. Oh my gosh, are my clients using buying oxys from someone? Um, and I'm like, man, there's a dependency. And I'm like, can how's this impacting you? Is this something you need to talk to your doctor about? And they're like, no. And then that's it. I'm done. Like it's that free will thing. Gosh, it's hard though.
Mhm.
We worry about them,
Mhm.
and that's part of why you do this work.
Yeah.
But yeah, the body does tell us like, oh, this isn't sitting well.
Yeah. I think it's just there was like a few like I like to have time for clients to process. That's like when I do my best work. So I think knowing I will only have a short time with this client.
Yeah.
So he got this medication from a walk-in doctor, so he doesn't have anyone following him. Like these kind of like red
Yeah.
flags starting to pop up. But again, knowing like I can do all I can
You
do.
do this much. You
Yeah.
do a piece of work. That's the other thing. Sometimes we can have clients who come in with so many issues and we only have like their benefits allow for what, 5 sessions or something or less. And you're like, so I know I hear this a lot. And it's like you get to do a piece of work.
Mhm.
And sometimes your piece of work in these few sessions is helping to create a template for the client of a safe relationship. Because if they've never had that before, that is a pretty big deal.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's your piece. Sometimes it might be a bit more stabilization and insight. You're not going to get through all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things. Yes, we have strong reactions and then helping people understand, yeah, we all have those. And the perspective is sometimes we can do a piece of work. He's had however many years to get to where he is, and you've had how many hours? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a good point. And I think sometimes when I'm like when all my healthy parts are on board, I could say like the relationship in these few sessions might
I
be
know.
so important. And then there's the part where it's like, is it enough? Right?
That's the thing, right? But it isn't enough. It's not going to change. You know what? We don't, and this is, I mean, we have to have our own philosophy on life. I had to come up with mine. I don't know what his journey is in this lifetime. I don't know what he's here to learn, and I know he has free will. And my role is this big. I have this many hours. I will do what I can. I will be present. And sometimes the first step is that he figures out and learns that safe relationships are possible, safe boundaried relationships are possible, and um, that he probably won't be afraid to come to therapy again. Sometimes that's where we start.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. But that's where it comes like it has to come up or you'd be carrying it. And that kind of stuff can make us sick, right? So we want it to come up. We want it to see the light. We want to hear it. We want to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for
That's a
the
good
meeting.
example. Is anyone else want to share theirs? And if you don't, it's totally fine.
I can share mine.
Sure.
So mine was a client. So we'd had a great session, like a really good session, and she was making really good progress. And here we are in the scheduling the next session piece, right? The
Hmm.
pressure's off at this point. It's good. It's been a good
Yeah.
session. Now we're booking a new session. So as we're doing this, and I'm in this other mode now,
Hmm.
trying to book this, as she's looking at her calendar to see what works, and a text comes in
Mm.
from the person that in her relationship, um, and suddenly, like she has a complete abreaction at that point,
Hmm.
and she's in full panic mode,
Hmm.
crying, "What do I do?" And just
Hmm.
and I think what hit me was just what I wrote down is this. It just caught me off guard. This is not the point in the
Hmm.
session when you would be expecting something like this,
No.
especially when it was such a good session.
Hmm.
And here, this random take a look at her text thing caused this. Now, fortunately, I didn't have another client coming in. We've been doing parts work, so we
Yeah.
were able to take this moment of activation
Hmm.
and sit with it in a safe
Hmm.
place and have her, you know, have
Hmm.
her notice the part of her that was reacting this way, and that she's in a safe place now, and let's just spend some time with this part
Hmm.
and give her the space she needs to feel what she needs to feel right now, and having her separate and notice this part and understand where it came from
Hmm.
and what this part is. Like it ended up being like probably I'm sure it was very beneficial to her healing
Hmm.
process, and
Hmm.
activation often can be, right?
Hmm.
But for me, again, it caught me off guard. I felt it in my stomach. Like that's where I
Hmm.
felt this. The stomach just absolutely dropped.
Hmm.
Shocking feeling. And as I kind of sat with that, I mean, I recall that feeling from childhood of
Hmm.
this something happening,
Unexpected. Oh my
some,
God, I didn't prepare for
yeah,
it.
something happening caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And this now almost that it can lead to a nervous anticipation
Hmm.
now that you've seen what's possible and it's reminded you now of what was possible from the past.
Hmm.
That's something I needed to work with in terms of being prepared to see this client
Which
again.
makes
You
sense.
know, yeah,
Yeah, that would activate our child parts that are hypervigilant, walking on eggshells,
yeah,
going, "Oh my God, it can happen in this office too." Like
yeah,
it,
yeah. And especially with her,
I
right?
wasn't
It's like,
ready.
yeah, like the next session with her, that was something that I really had to, prepare
Yeah.
myself for. And, we talked about that incident right off the bat. We put in some, like, maybe best not to check messages. Give yourself some time after session to check messages or, if
Yeah.
possible. But that was a lot about protecting me too. I didn't want to
Yes,
run into that again. But
which is fair.
yeah,
You had boundary time for both your safety,
yeah. So,
you
like I
know.
said, fortunately, there wasn't another client. I think we went another 20 minutes just to
Yeah.
sit with her and let that, get her in a more stabilized spot because she needed to leave the office. She needed to catch a bus, and I
Hmm.
suggest she does something kind for herself now. She says, "Yeah,
Yes.
I'll stop at Tim Hortons and get a coffee first," and so she was kind of back and being able to be stable. But yeah, that was something.
Those are moments where, that are dysregulating for us, because we're in our therapist's persona. We're in that adult embodied, fully present, and then it's like you weren't expecting it. You were moving out of that. You were doing admin, and something happened, and holy crap! And it was a whole big panic,
Mhm.
a crisis you had to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
for myself, I
yes,
really had to be honest with my parts. Like there was a part of me that was kind of pissed off about the way this went
yep,
down. Like the parts saying like I did my job. This was a
yes,
good
I'm done.
session. Like I'm done. This shouldn't be happening right now. Like this
Yes,
isn't fair. Like right.
yes,
So I just had to be honest with that part and just acknowledge, yeah, you're right. That kind of sucked. That
yeah,
that happened when it did. But it is what it
yeah.
is. We're okay.
Yeah, those are like, and those are the parts, yeah, that we deal with in our own session too. And sometimes when that happens, if I feel my parts getting really activated, because what happens when we get activated, we go back to being 5 or 10 or whatever, right? We're no longer our embodied, we're no longer primarily in our embodied adult therapist self. We're living from survival mode of another part that takes over. So I found dual awareness can be really helpful in those moments to say, okay, this is for me, a 6-year-old part that's freaking out. She has no power, no control, doesn't have a lot of skills. There's an adult freaking out. She's got to try and calm this adult. She doesn't know what to do. I got to tell her, you know what? I've got this. This is an adult problem. The adult you is going to handle it. You don't have to handle it. Sometimes, I'm not going to say always, sometimes I feel there's that part goes, because it's still stuck thinking it has to, in whatever 5-year-old mind, body, lack of resources, it has to handle it. But if I can say to if my adult part says, I've got this, I don't like it, I'm kind of annoyed by it. This isn't what I want to be doing for the next 20 minutes, but I've got this. Then sometimes that part can settle a little. I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I know that it's been helpful to me sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do a lot of parts work, IFS work. Um, at the moment when it happened, I kind of I was still in
You
adult
were still
therapy mode. I was able to hold
okay,
space for
good,
it. But I knew
good.
afterwards in my own processing that part needed to be addressed. Like the one that was angry about it, thought it was unfair. It's like I did my job. Like that's what he was saying. Like I did my
That's
job.
right.
I did everything right. It was a great session. And
Yeah.
this happened. Like that's not fair.
No,
And
he's
yeah,
right.
he's right. Exactly. So I was able just to give
Yeah.
space for that. And you know how it is with these parts. When they're heard and
Yeah.
validated and appreciated, they tend to settle down. So
Yeah, the really high emotion can dissipate and they can release, right? Which is really nice.
yeah, it is.
So good for you. You handle it, you handled that well, and it is disappointing when that kind of stuff happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's another good example. And when we go back, if we still feel the knot in the stomach, if you think about it in a day or two, there's still something there that needs to be addressed, right? Because when we do release it fully with whatever part holds it, the knot will be gone. So so that just tells us that there's still, if talking about it today, if you go back and you're like, oh, it's still there, then there's something else that needs to come up. I don't know what, but it's quite fascinating. I find when I do that parts work and do the somatic check, we know it's done when the pain is gone. And then I have the person reflect on and notice the absence of the pain or the nausea or the whatever it is, the twisting, because the nervous system has released it. And reflection is so important for integration, right? So I ask supervisees not only to reflect on things that cause them distress about cases, but also where they really feel good. You felt good about that. Let your body feel that. Notice what, like, because even before that moment, for example, where she had her panic, you felt really good about that. So even going back to that and how good you felt, and let your nervous system absorb that, that also integrates that into your nervous system, which is quite lovely because we want to integrate the good stuff too, to reflect on it, to take it in, to be conscious, to acknowledge it, to allow a template to get stronger for that sense of being embodied and happy and feeling good about what you did, the work you did. It's kind of cool. But I know we're at time for a break. So we okay to take 15 minutes from now? Sounds good. Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so I've looked ahead at the slides and I see I've covered some things already just through talking it through. So I've just moved ahead a couple slides. And I just wanted to share something about somatic work, um, why it's become so integral in the work I do. Um, so about so for over 20 years, I suffered from really painful fibromyalgia, to the point my pain would hit 7, 8 every day. And I learned to compartmentalize it, to just keep going, to endure. And it was brutal, especially with children who needed physical care when they were younger, that sort of thing. And I had gone to see a somatic therapist about maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, um, because I'm very somatic. And so the reason I went was not to do with fibro. It was because whenever I'm sharing this because I think it might be helpful for your clients for you to understand in case you have clients with chronic pain, a chronic pain syndrome, or who's very somatic in terms of trauma symptoms. But one of the things I noticed was that whenever I had to advocate against injustice, people in position of power, I can do it and I can do it very well. I'm usually very successful, but I get sick, very sick the week following. And I was like, this is going to kill me because I was getting sicker and sicker each time, right? And so I went to a somatic therapist. I'm like, I need help with this because something's going on. And so as we did the somatic work, and I know we did a really short somatic piece. We didn't necessarily release the pain, but as we went through like a year and a half, it was about a year and a half in, we had gone through so much trauma stuff and just releasing it to the pain so there was none left in whatever part of the body was holding it that was connected to a memory that was, and thoughts and whatever. About a year and a half in, I noticed I wasn't taking medication for fibro anymore. The medication I was taking, it was pregabalin, and it was really hard because I always had to balance between brain fog and pain relief. So I was still in pain, but not so much, but because you couldn't have just one or the other. And so it was really difficult. And so what I noticed was that a year and a half in, I had forgotten to take my medication for 2 weeks and I had no pain. And I was like, well, this is weird. So I didn't really say anything to anyone for about 6 months because I thought maybe it's a fluke. Because I used to have pain from the base of my skull down to my toes in both sets of fingers, right? Excruciating pain. Like the weight of a sleeve was unbearable sometimes, or a sheet. And I had no pain. And after 6 months, I go to my doctor and I'm like, have you ever had patients come in and the fibro just goes away? And he's like, nope. And I was like, oh. And so now it's been 2 years and I don't have it anymore. So I really think that somatic work releases the pain that's stored in our body during trauma. And there's a book, 2010, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called The Impact of Early Life Trauma on Health and Disease. It's by a number of experts. Ruth Lanius, a psychiatrist here in London, was one of the editors. She does a lot of work on neuroimaging and trauma, different types, and I've been in some of her studies. But it talks about the correlation with chronic pain syndromes and early life trauma, childhood trauma, and heart disease. And lupus, MS, fibro. People who've had early life trauma have a much higher rate of these illnesses. And so it's fascinating, really. And so that's why this is important to me. And what's been interesting is some of my clients who've had chronic pain in different areas of their life, like their bodies and whatever, and we weren't even targeting it, will come in and say, you know what, for 6 months, this hasn't happened. Or it's fascinating. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out there because it's just really amazing to me. Trauma is stored somewhere in the body. It has to be. We're not just made of air. It's not outside us. It's stored in parts of the body. And, as we release it, I think the system can heal sometimes. It's very fascinating. I just want to share that.
I think both those books, When the Body Keeps the Score, mention something like that, and also Gabor Mate has When the Body Says No.
Yes.
And When the Body Says No talks all about
like
this.
when I would get sick after I spoke out, it was like, shut up.
Mhm.
You're putting
Well,
yourself in danger, right?
and
So,
the way he talks about how if we attack ourselves in our thoughts and we self-criticize and we're always criticizing and we're attacking ourselves, then it shouldn't be a surprise that then our immune system turns against us,
mhm,
you
mhm.
know. And I thought, wow,
Yes,
that's interesting, right?
yes. It is, it's so fascinating. I mean, this is just, it amazes me just to see how mind body connect and how we can heal it, the transformations that can occur. So I just wanted to share that because it matters a lot to me. So just talking about the somatic piece, I know I've covered a lot of this already, but it just can help us. And I've talked about how we can pick up the client's pain physically, emotionally, their thoughts, whatever. We need to protect ourselves sometimes, and our supervisees will need to learn how to do that too, um, because we don't want to process everything through our own bodies. It's not good for us. We can be present, but grounded. We don't have to process all their pain for them. Okay. Just these are just some prompts. So throughout the slides, you'll have some prompts. How do I ask that? What are some of the things we can ask? I do use immediacy with clients and with supervisees. I notice your jaw seems to be clenching, or you look like you've stopped breathing. Can you tell me what's happening when you started to talk about that? Or your voice changed, or whatever it is, right? Your posture changed. Or I noticed a huge like sigh. Can you tell me what happened there? That's usually when trauma releases, right? So when I'm doing work with clients and because that's what didn't happen during the trauma. There was no sigh of relief and a signal to the brain that it's over. The brain, they're still reliving. But if we can get to the point of they're supported, they're seen, they're heard with their allies, the pain is allowed to be and release. Sometimes I see that that's a sign to the brain, the whole body, that it's over. That trauma that's been stored in the body is finished. And so I'll say, I just saw you sigh. Can you tell me what happened? I just feel like the pain released. Okay, let's stay with that. For the next several minutes, take that in. This is a nervous system that's been holding this trauma for 30 years. Let it feel what it's like without it there. And so that's a really important somatic prompt as well, right? And sometimes, we can do that based on what we see. Um, we've talked about this, the emotional countertransference and what that can mean. Um, we can ask, is there anything you're still carrying from that session? What came up from you in session? What's going on now? Those sorts of things. Um, when we're struggling in our brains with thoughts, it can be our own internal conflicts about stuff that's going on in our lives. It might be a conflict with their values and ours. We might come in feeling really confused. I don't know what happened in that session. That used to happen with me with certain clients, and I realized that I came out of a session, I felt like I was spinning somehow in a session, like I don't even know what happened. And I come out and go, okay, that's what the client was feeling like. When they come in and they're so overwhelmed and they just tell you everything. And I couldn't get my footing in the session. It's because I was spinning with the client. So that can be helpful. Um, Reflect on our own cognitions around what theoretical frameworks we're working in, what are our cultural perceptions that are impacting what's going on with the client. Those are important pieces. And those are some potential questions, what lens were you looking at this through? I know mine's always trauma, it just is now. Um, but if that doesn't fit, then I need to look at it from a different way. Trauma informed, um, parts work, somatic, trying to take into account cultures. So what did it feel like it fit? Was something missing? Behaviors. This might be, oh, this does come up sometimes. Supervisors say, you know what, I keep going over time with this one client. And so we need to think, so what's going on there? What's happening? Um, and they'll say, the boundaries around sessions are there to protect the client and us so that we know what to expect. When we go over consistently, and then sometimes we don't, the client might take that as they did something wrong. We're offended in some way because we've changed our behavior. The other thing is, I know some clients go in and they go, okay, it's an hour. Well, my appointments are 60 minutes, but they used to be 50, right? When I worked in an institution. And it'd be like, I can do this for 50 minutes, but I don't want to have to do it any longer because this is hard work. And the therapist can feel the same way. So being trauma informed means we try and, unless it's exceptional, we try to stick to time frames. So it's predictable. Everyone knows what's happening. It's good for us. It's good for the client. So sometimes those are things we talk about, like, what can you tell me why you're going overtime? And just with this one client, or are you doing it with everyone? And what's going on? What's going on somatically when you think of that? When you think of going overtime, they brought it up. Something's bothering them about that. Where does it sit in the body? Nada?
In your experience, when a therapist is struggling with this very often,
Mm-hmm.
what does it what does it usually mean? Is that too much of a general question? Do you think it's quite specific? Or is it usually
Hmm.
something that's because I can definitely relate to going overtime with some clients.
Some clients,
And
it's a
yeah,
therapist empathy. They're trying to, like, so I had a supervisee this week who came in. She's been a therapist for a long time, but she says, with this one client, I keep going over, and I think it's because everything in her life is so hard. I just want to give a little more empathy, like, make up for some of that. And so that's countertransference, right? And so I just said that was her reason. She reflected and she knew what it was. So I don't know if it's always a thing. Um, some therapists see it as showing they care. Um, Especially our clients have been through so much with relationships, right? But we can't make up for it. So it's about the predictability. It's about safety for them and us. I try now I do 60-minute hours, and so it's really 55, somewhere in there I'm stopping unless I mean I've gone 2 hours when I'm doing a suicide risk assessment, right? And that requires it in some cases. But generally, I suggest we try and keep it so that our behavior is consistent. Because what if you get a client that you've booked in 15 minutes after and that client stays? You've just changed your behavior with a client who expected it would be an hour and 10. Now they're not special to you anymore or something. Do you know what I mean? So it's just something to consider. I'm not going to say you shouldn't, I'm just saying keep that in mind, okay? But that does come up, or people don't know how, they feel rude interrupting. And so we talk about how do you say that? And so I suggest, I'm aware of the time. What you're talking about is really important. I've made a note of it for next session. I want us to have enough time to address it fully. Those kinds of things. And sometimes we do have to interrupt. And because if our relationship can be a microcosm of their relationships, and if they keep crossing boundaries with us, they're probably crossing boundaries with lots of people. And so we're not really doing them favors, right? So those kinds of things we talk about. Struggling to sit in silence with clients. That's common with beginning therapists, right? How do you trust something's going on in here when you're quiet? And I know with somatic work, there is a lot of silence because I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, what's going, check in with your body. Where is it? Put your awareness in there. Notice what comes up. And they can be silent for 5 minutes. And if and when you're comfortable, you can let me know what's happening. And I'm waiting. That can be hard to do. I will check in eventually, after several minutes. Can you tell me what's happening to make sure they're not stuck? But it is patience. So that's part of it. And then we already talked about sometimes the behavior of trying to convince a client the value of doing something differently. These are some of the questions we might ask. They're in there for you to look over if you need them. These are just different ideas. I'm going to move through them because I want to get to the models of the types of ways that people might do reflection. You are getting so much information, you can't possibly do all of it. You pick what works for you, right? Same with our supervisees. Other ways people self-reflect: meditation, prayer, peer feedback, peer clinical supervision, personal therapy can be good places to think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? We're going to do a case example. So we're going to talk about this case. I'm going to get you to reflect on what your reactions to it are. And then we'll go through the 3 different models of self-reflection to see, you can decide which one you like because it'll take us through the models. But you can see if you like one of these reflection models. So you can read about this client. And is it okay if I go to the next slide? Let me know when I can. Probably should have read it out loud. Are we okay to go to the next slide? Okay. So the incident, I'll just do it this way. During the session in late autumn, Maya arrives visibly distressed. She discloses that she's facing eviction and has nowhere to go over the coming weekend. She becomes tearful and she says, "You're the only person who really understands me. I don't know what I'd do without you." And as the session draws to a close, she asks whether she can text you over the weekend, just to know someone's there. The therapist, who's feeling caught off guard and moved by her distress, hesitates and in that pause says, "Let me think about that." So Maya brightens, interpreting this as a maybe yes. The therapist leaves the session feeling unsettled, aware that a boundary may have shifted and that Maya is now holding an expectation that wasn't clearly defined. So if this was a situation your supervisee was dealing with, what do you think would leave you feeling unsettled about this? Like what? And I don't know if we want to talk this out. Maybe that would be the best way. What about this scenario feels kind of off or concerning?
It's the human aspect of it, that this person is facing a crisis.
Yeah.
So my heart is going to go out to a human going through
Yeah.
that. I read, that there's a little manipulation there on her part, even though she's desperate. This kind of
Yeah.
comment about "you're the only one." I'm like kind of feeling like I'm being put on a spot here, and my good nature, empathy is that boundary is being crossed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can feel for the clinician there being put on the spot like that. If you're not prepared for that and you don't have
That would be, and you didn't think of it ahead.
yeah, if you don't have a script for that saying, we're not structured to take care of that, I'm not structured to do that. In fact,
Yes.
that's a boundary as part of my profession. But here is, crisis support line. Here is,
Yeah.
a shelter. Here, if you're prepared for that, then you can provide resources.
Yes.
That's different, right?
So we might have somebody come in and be like, "Oh my God, I didn't know what to do. I was on the spot. I think I should have did something." Can you imagine what emotions do you think would come up for that therapist? We're good at empathizing.
Mhm.
Vanessa?
I think I'd probably feel guilty that I couldn't do this and maybe worried that it's coming up. Like a blend, like
Mhm.
knowing what the answer is, like knowing that the answer is no,
Mhm.
then having this kind of worry about how to provide this information to the client in a way that's not going to be perceived as, in these moments where it feels like everyone is abandoning me now.
Yeah,
My therapist is doing the exact same thing.
right. So guilt, fear of hurting the client in this crisis point could be emotions. Feeling a little bit annoyed, maybe the client, that there was maybe some manipulation going on in the cross. We often have a normal reaction of a bit of annoyance or anger when a boundary's crossed. That's normal. Nada, you said you're going to say something, I think.
I guess I feel like I'm having a totally different response. I don't know if it's okay.
Your
I
response is your
I
response.
feel I feel like upset with the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Not I feel that response. Maybe I'm over identifying with the client, let me say that. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that response sounded dismissive.
Mm-hmm. It was wishy-washy.
Yeah, and I feel like dismissed hearing it, which is probably my because
Mm-hmm.
it's like they're tearful. They're telling you that they
Mm-hmm.
basically have nowhere to go. You're the only one. And let me think about that. Just sounds so like cerebral and not you're not with me in my feelings right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the idea of being caught off guard, and we can't
Yeah.
always say the perfect thing. But I guess my first response was, "Let me think about that." It's just like hanging in the air,
Yeah.
and it's leaving a bad taste for me for some reason.
I think all those responses are valid. Like everything, those are all parts of what could come up, right? What you've all identified, and we all resonate with it at different points. Whatever's our loudest response usually comes up first, and if we take time and reflect, we usually get the other quieter ones. So it's whatever triggers to us as coming up. So yeah, different emotions uh, with with the therapist. I might do some body scan, and we as supervisors might also have a physiological response to that in terms of what our immediate emotions were. There's often a physiological piece that goes with that. And how do we make sense of it? The situation with the client, we can use different frameworks to make sense of it, different theoretical, different, we can use empathy. She's desperate. She doesn't know what to do. She's scared. Um, and the situation still requires boundaries. I mean, there's lots going on here, right? And so thinking about what could we have done differently? And so the challenge for the supervisee is going to be to admit this, especially if they're feeling badly about it or guilty to us and say, I didn't know what to do. We can say, those are hard situations when they surprise us and kind of, and it breaks your heart. She's saying you're the only one and she's going to be evicted. That's terrifying. So let's go through this in a way that we can think of what can we learn from this? How can we handle it? So we're going to look at the other models. So with Gibbs, it's a formal model. You can use it or not with a supervisee. You get them to describe what happened. What were you thinking and feeling? What went well? What was challenging? What sense do you make of this based on theory, supervision, other frameworks? What could you have done differently? And what is your action plan? So the description, if we were to go through this with a supervisee, it might be objectively, they were asked to extend contact outside the hours, and the therapist was taken off guard and gave an ambiguous response that the client took as hopeful. So we could go through this and try and untangle that with our supervisee. What were you thinking and feeling? They might have felt they wanted to rescue or soothe or be the one person that this client could count on when they've never, to make up for all the people who weren't there for the client. They might feel badly because if they set a boundary, they might be seen as cold or like all those other people, not being supportive. They might feel guilty. I have more power. I have more privilege, in this relationship. This isn't fair. She's being evicted. How can I help? And it could be our own countertransference. If we've been abandoned, we're thinking, oh, well, I know how that feels. It's horrible to feel alone. We could also add somatic reflections, not just feelings. What was that like for you? Because it could give you a knot in your stomach, could make you feel sick. It could lots of things, right? Bring up for us. What was good and bad about experience? Well, I mean, one thing that isn't here, but she said she valued the relationship. So there is a therapeutic alliance. It matters to her. She feels seen and heard by the therapist. The therapist brought this to supervision. They're still in a relationship. What's difficult, they weren't clear with her. And she was left not knowing what the response was at the end of the day. And the boundary was not clear in that moment in time. So, what do we make sense? Was it countertransference? Was it difficult for me to say no because I have a hard time saying no? Is it that I'm usually the rescuer in my family or relationships? That I usually go above and beyond and I felt like I should do that here? Power and care. By being available, is that helpful? Or is it reinforcing dependency? Or different questions, right? From a trauma-informed lens, are there mesh boundaries in the client's life? Does she usually have a mesh boundaries? Would this be another example of that, where boundaries are crossed? Person-centered, how do we do unconditional positive regard and support? And how do we negotiate that with professional boundary? So there's lots of pieces we're trying to understand, trying to make sense. And what else could you have done? And Lucho, this seems to be what you were talking about. Crisis resources, and you can hear how frightened you are. I can't do texting outside of sessions, but let's use our time to set up a safety plan, direct to crisis supports, maybe do a follow-up session on Monday. These are the community resources, or I will send you community resources, shelter information, whatever, that kind of thing. So that's Gibbs' way to deal with it. Action plan, we help them have a script, right? This happens again. What can I say about out of office contact? And you can go back and say, you know what, I feel like I didn't handle that well. And I talked to my supervisor about it. And what I wish I had said was, I could see how frightened you were. And I know it's feeling pulled towards wanting to help because I felt badly for you. At the same time, ethically and professionally, I should have helped in this way by offering these supports and these resources, these crisis resources for you. Does that make sense? Or is there any other thing you would do differently with the supervisee? Sounds okay? Okay. So another model is shown two models of professional reflection. So one's in the moment. And my example of thinking in the moment was like, oh, okay, so wait, let me do this again. I'll give you an example, reflection in action. When you're in real time, an unexpected client response, and you adjust and you try and stay embodied and just go with whatever comes out. So I've had that happen not so long ago. An example, I was working with a client, and one of the things I do when a part releases pain and a trauma memory, and we absorb that into the body. So say it's a child part or an adolescent part, say it's a 10-year-old part, and she's released the pain, And I would often say, would you be comfortable going with your ally, whether it's the wisest, most compassionate self or spirit animal or whatever? Would you be willing to go and just be in the sacred place, this adult sacred place or safe place, whatever we want to call it, that's been created, so you can just be 10? And you don't have to live in this trauma memory anymore. You're allowed to leave it. Would you be willing to go there and just be 10 and to leave the rest of this to your adult self to take care of? I shouldn't have done that in a point where the adult was living in a very dysregulated way. And the child part's like, no, because normally I do that. And the adult's pretty competent, you know, has learned how to self-regulate. But this adult part was going through a crisis too. And the child part did not trust the adult part. And so I had to backpedal. I'm like, okay. Because she's like, no, she's self-harming. I don't trust her. Okay. Okay. There are two ways this went. Is there anything she can do to help you to feel safer? And what the child part said was she needs to get rid of her self-harm kit, which was news to me. I didn't know there was a self-harming kit. I said, that's helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Secondly, would you trust your wisest, most compassionate self to be with your adult self, to take over the responsibilities that you were holding on to at 10 years old? And usually the child part will say yes, even if they don't trust their adult self. They'll trust their wisest, most compassionate self. So I had to do some backpedaling because that was an unexpected response for me. I hadn't thought it through because it had worked so well with other clients. I was like, okay, I need to make the adult self as sure as regulated. And if not, we're going to ask the child part to hand off the responsibilities to the wisest, most compassionate self. So those are moments when I was taken off guard. We do that, right? Thinking on our feet. You've got examples of times when you didn't expect things and you're like, oh my goodness, now what am I going to do? And so that's reflection in action. Then there's the afterwards. Afterwards, we reflect, we look at what happened. I don't like how that went. Maybe I should have handled it differently. Look at the notes, if it was recorded. What was I thinking? What was going on with me? What was my countertransference? If we go back to the same situation with Maya, in the moment, the therapist already had some fish. If we were to use this one and reflect on it, the therapist had probably some somatic cues that things were going a bit off the rails, right? If they were paying attention, they're probably like, oh, what do I do that, whatever, however that showed up in the body. She's asking to contact me on the weekend. This is important. And something shifted in the room. So there was that awareness. But it was interrupted. Okay. It was probably the emotional the charge. You're the only person who really understands me. That surprise moment. Can I contact you? And because it was a surprise, the therapist kind of got destabilized for a moment, which happens to us when something really emotional or distressing happens in session. And rather than pausing to reflect on it in the moment and think, okay, that was a lot. How do I get grounded and respond? They used a deferral. Let me think about it. Because they didn't follow through on the, oh my gosh, I'm not feeling comfortable. What do I do with this? And possibly they didn't have a response in their repertoire of what do I do in this situation. So we can talk to them about that. We can reflect on that. There was a moment, this doesn't feel right. but she said, I'm the only person and she's going to be homeless. So there was a lot going on. So we can prompt that to explore. What was your body telling you? What did you notice when she said two things? You were the only person she could trust and count on. And two, she needed to talk to you to know someone was there. There were probably two responses. They might be different, they might be the same physically. So what were you trying to manage? Probably both Maya's distress and your own distress. And when did you notice things were kind of slipping? What got in the way of you talking about what was happening in the moment, acknowledging her feelings? You sound really scared. Because that might have helped too. You sound really afraid. What are your concerns right now? What are your options? The therapist didn't go there. So reflecting on that might have been helpful. And then there's the after reflection, right? They're carrying it probably for days, thinking, oh man, I didn't handle that well. So probably going through it. And we can go through what shaped your reactions in the moment. Let's bring it into awareness. What was going on? What did they know professionally and intuitively at the moment that they weren't able to express? That this is probably too much, that I'm crossing a boundary. If I say yes, we can talk outside of practice. And how do we make sense of this? Attachment theory, trauma informed, countertransference, just relationship dynamics. How do we make sense of this? And what learning might be brought to bear next time? What do you know now that you didn't know then? It might, oftentimes, as supervisors, we're helping them find words, right? We're helping them find the words to say things in a kind, supportive way, professional way. And again, here are some prompts that might help. Um, does it connect to patterns in your work? Is it hard to say no for this supervisee? What's that about? Could be cultural, could be a family role thing, could be the way they see their role as a social worker or a psychotherapist that you need. They may have been in roles before where they did more practical stuff. If they worked in roles before where they helped people find housing, where they managed crisis, it might be a case of, well, I know I could, but as a therapist, just because you can doesn't mean you should, you know? We have professional roles. We can't do it all. So sometimes there's a crossover of roles from previous employment or previous work. And then there's Kolb's experiential learning cycle. So it talks about, this is a different model. We're looking at what the experience was, what happened, how did it feel, what happened with the client, what happened with me. Again, we're looking at different theoretical frameworks, and we try and apply the new conceptualizations in the learning to future practice. So in this situation, what actually happened? And it talks about what was it like in the room? What did it feel like emotionally, physically, being in that room? Before you reflect, what occurred? So they might have said, I was sitting, like, this is just raw stuff. I was sitting across from her. She was describing her crisis. I could see she was getting really upset. She was tearful. She was wringing her hands, wiping her face. And I heard her say, you're the only person who really understands me. And you feel that weight. And you feel that honor. And you feel what might feel like a responsibility that came with that. And the internal pull to comfort and rescue. As we're getting to the close, and you're just not sure what to say. Feel that moment of hesitation. Oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. And so I just say, I don't know, kind of like maybe uh, I'm not sure, whatever. And she responds positively. And then I walked to my car. I went to my next session and I felt like, oh my gosh, I blew that. So we reflect on what happened, what it was really like in the room for that person and the aftermath. And then, so we ask them to go back to the room, the image, the feeling, the words. What did you feel in your body? When did it shift for you? Can you describe what happened? And we're not going to make sense of it yet, but just describe what happened. And then we might notice, maybe they notice then they do the reflective part. But how did you feel about Maya's comments and how it felt to try and hold that boundary in the moment? And from her perspective, it could be an attachment behavior. She's reaching out to see if you're available consistently in her worst moments. If we were watching it through one-way screen, what would we see? We'd see a therapist struggling and responding because they didn't know what to do. They were caught, probably between values, maybe between roles they've played, but they were caught. And if we look at it a week later, as opposed to right after, how might we see it differently? Because when the therapist is coming out of the room, it might be like, oh, I really blew that. I blew it for myself. I blew it for her. I didn't handle it well. But how might you see it differently a week later when you have time to reflect and understand what happened, what was going on? So it's noticing what they did and what they didn't do without judgment. It's learning. It's curiosity. Curiosity is the only way to get rid of judgment in therapy, right? Be curious. Try and understand. Supervision prompts. How do these are just some. If you were watching it from outside, what would you have noticed? What would have stood out for you? How do you imagine Maya experienced your response? What do you notice now that you didn't notice in the moment? And what were you most trying to avoid? And what did that cost? To you, to her, to the relationship? And then the conceptualization. So how do we understand this in theory, after personal reflection, but to bring it to a broader framework, these are just a few. So attachment theory could be the anxious attachment behavior. I need you. Seeing if they're available. Can I be in contact when I'm scared? So the therapist, when they were hesitant and they didn't quite give a response that was definite, that consistency might be felt as it was unstable because there's no certainty in what the commitment is at that point. And so the therapist can go back and say, okay, I need to be more clear so that she can predict the boundaries and that they're safe and she understands why they're there. So countertransference, we need to look at why did you kind of say yes rather than these are the boundaries. We need to look at that, right? Why do you think it happened? And where do we need to go with that? Ethics and power. We have to look at the ethical part of this. They exist, why they exist, for the integrity of our work, for the therapist's safety, for the client's safety. And that helps the therapist to ground themselves in the ethics. There is It does help to be able to explain to a client that ethically I'm not allowed. We have this relationship, but I'm not allowed to be in contact outside. Uh, just to so we're clear about expectations and availability, but I can help you find these other resources. Trauma informed. I mean, the good thing is the client's expressing vulnerability and trust, which says there's trust in the therapist. It speaks to the power of the therapeutic alliance. Okay, that's good. And boundaries are important because do not exist in interrelational trauma. They're not respected. And so it's really important in healing that they're there. So the prompts we ask, what theoretical frameworks will help you to make sense of what happened? We might have to bring them up, right? And what do you think in terms of countertransference? What was happening? How can we make sense of it this way? How can we make sense of this in terms of a trauma-informed lens? That can help. And then we ask them to, given all they understand, what would they do differently? And so that closes the loop. So it might be going back, the therapist to go back with Maya and talk about, I want to come back to what happened. I didn't respond clearly, and I need to be honest with you. We talked about the moment of repair. I should have been more clear when you asked about texting. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not able to offer contact outside of our session, and I think it's important that we understand together what brought that up for you, and also that I should have handled it differently in terms of identifying safety planning, other supports and resources, and I'm sorry I didn't. And then reflection, they might want to deal with it. The therapist might want to deal with it in their own therapy, do some journaling. Do I understand? So they understand what that was about. Because when we understand, we can then make embodied choices going forward. We don't keep reacting from the countertransference. It's an awareness, and we can address it and make just conscious decisions, which is what we're always trying to do. And sometimes we rehearse ahead, what would our script be in that type of situation? And we might want to help or give the supervisee a script, because I don't know about you, but it took me a long time to think about how to say different things that came up recurring with clients. And so I had to try it and try again, like I'm aware of the time, that script. That took a long time for me to come up with that, right? After fumbling and not doing it very well. But just those types of things that we have had to come up with to explain certain things to clients, if the supervisee doesn't have to start from scratch, it's a benefit to them. Okay, so we've already talked about this. Before, you know what, so these are just, I guess before we go on to anything else, I just want to know, do you have a preference out of those three models? Like, do you like one better than the other?
I think I like experiential.
Mm-hmm.
Because it just gives them a chance to like check in with how they feel first
Yeah.
before we sort of ask like the more like evaluative kind of questions, like what are you drawing from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we're still dysregulated, we're not going to be able to even think to do that conceptualization and draw on any theories. Our brain won't be working if we're outside our window of tolerance, right? So even in those moments, they might need reassurance and
I
the
was gonna
ability.
say,
Go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry, Shirley.
No,
This
go
is why I
ahead.
raised my hand because
No,
I'm
it's
always at
totally
risk of
fine because
cutting
I
someone
feel
off.
like I have to fill silence. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm glad you gave us a variety of models because we're gonna have diverse like supervisees,
Mhm.
and it seems like there's room to kind of use all of them in
Yeah,
different times with different people. So I appreciate that.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. We do use it with different times. And I can't say I use, yeah, I can't say I use anyone exactly like that, but I sometimes use aspects depending on what comes to me. But it can be helpful for a supervisee to have that in front of them sometimes if you want to say, okay, this will help me to understand what happened. If you want. If not, you just take them through the process. But it gives us different options and we can mix and match, right? So yeah, I don't believe I'm not a believer in any one way to do everything, theory or otherwise. So we have to adjust to who we're working with and what the relationship dynamic is. And that is a skill too. But sometimes it helps to have a framework to start with, right? I am going to just, again, I'm aware of the time and there's so much here in the notes. Let me just look. Yeah, I want to go to the developmental stages. So these are different stages of supervisee development. It doesn't mean level one is always the beginning practitioner. Sometimes we have highly anxious people who are very self-critical and worried about all the technicalities of how you do this, what words do you use, like, so regardless of whether they're a brand new therapist or not, it's about structure, reassurance, giving them scripts or frameworks, like I did with my people who wanted to learn how to do this attachment protocol with Safe Place and Why is this most compassionate self? I wrote it out as a script. Being more clear, more defined, more explicit with them helps to allay fears and anxieties, letting them know too that whatever you're giving isn't the only way. It's a framework for them to become familiar with what the work they're doing, but they can adjust it as they go. We also have, those some who can be overconfident, um, and they oscillate with that with self-doubt, or they're just overconfident. But they're beginning to notice some countertransference. The reflection is up and down. So we're more gently challenging, right? And reminding of ethical obligations, talking about countertransference. We're going to do more gentle challenging. And if they're critical incident, we're going to go through the analysis with them. Um, I find the somatic work is really helpful to get to truth, even if someone's overconfident, because overconfidence is a protector part, right? It's usually hiding the insecurities, the fear of failure, even though it's not failure. So I might do more modeling, role modeling vulnerability. Say, how was it, when you were in this situation? I can tell you when I've been in that situation, these are some of the mistakes I've made, or, I felt like intimidated, whatever. I wonder how you were handling this. Let me think of an example. A client who's very, very highly educated, has more experience than me in the field, and they're coming to me for therapy. And I will admit I'm intimidated. And so because sometimes my clients will talk about a client who's very intelligent and they challenge everything and whatever, and I say, you know what, I get that. I've worked with these people. I'm thinking, oh my God, like I'm really self-conscious about what I'm doing all of a sudden, and I'm looking at it from two lenses. What is this? It happens. And so it's like, all you can do is be embodied. You be embodied, you do your work. If you're meant to do the work with them, they'll stay. You be present. You hear what you're trying to understand things from their perspective. That's what we want to do. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to, we we do the work with them in the best way we can, and we just try and understand. Because there are moments when we're intimidated by clients. So with the clients who might be overconfident and then self-doubting, I might share more of my vulnerability because then they feel like, okay, if she's been doing this for this long and she has moments like that, it's okay for me to admit I have moments like that. Right? As explain, I don't see clients as them and us. I see it as we. And so without self-disclosing to my clients, when I talk about stuff, I talk about we. When we've been through when we've been through childhood experiences that are traumatizing, um, where I don't know, I use we, okay? Because I don't want to do them and us. And it's the same with supervisees. There's nobody up above the other. We all struggle. We all have challenges. I'm not going to pretend I don't have challenges as a therapist. That's part of it. And so sometimes just that openness can be helpful. Does that make sense? Or did I go off on a tangent and lose people there? Um, but that's I guess I see that transparency without being overly self-disclosing can be helpful. Um, then we have those who are really stable. The people I meet with who've been practicing for 10 years or longer. They know what they're doing, they're aware, they're self-reflective. Their cases are like sometimes we do one case in an hour because they're so self-reflective. Whereas with the newer therapists, we might go through 3 cases in an hour, right? Because it's just the depth is more um, for these advanced practitioners. They're good with complexity, ambiguity. They get that. You can hold, sometimes what feel to be opposing feelings and thoughts and values all at once, and they're all true, right? Like just they're better with the ambiguity. That's There's more depth to that. And I think there is more sharing with a colleague. If I have insights, I'll share them more openly, as opposed to trying to teach supervisors how to be self-reflective and find insights, which we're teaching as opposed to sharing all of ours. We're trying to facilitate a learning process with them. With those who are advanced, it's more like collegial sharing, reflection. It's a little bit different. Does that make sense to you in your experience? Okay. Those are the things I just wanted to cover today. I know you guys have long days. I count your readings as part of our 3 hours and the self-reflection paper. So I usually will not go right till 9 because I know I were you, I would be really happy if we ended up. Any questions or anything from today? Oh, the other thing I wanted to tell you, Jen and I were talking about it, and I think we said the last thing was a multiple choice exam, and you could do it, you'd have 2 hours for it. We were going to put that in the last class so you can do it in class and you don't have to find another time. So we're going to use like the last hour and a half of class 10. If you want to do it there, you can. Jen and I will both be there. You can shut off your cameras. All you're going to do is say like question 1A, 2C, whatever, right? And just email that to us. But we'll be there if you have any questions. If you need to go over the hour and a half, not a problem, we'll stay. Does that sound okay? And if you don't want to do it there, you can find another time. It's open book. You can look at all your notes. It's not going to be no tricks in it about, what was the worst possible answer and the second worst and the best and the second best. We're not doing that. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Have a good night. Thank you
You
for your
too.
participation and attention. I appreciate it.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.